Buenos días a todas y a todos. Vamos a tener a continuación la conferencia de clausura, para la que invitamos al profesor Nathan Schlanger, que ha estado trabajando durante muchos años en temas relacionados con la arqueología prehistórica, los orígenes de la arqueología prehistórica, la cultura material, patrimonio, gestión, política de la arqueología en contextos europeos y coloniales. Ha escrito varios libros interesantes. Yo destacaría quizás el de European Archaeology Abroad, una aproximación muy interesante desde una perspectiva francesa, pero no solo francesa, de la arqueología prácticamente en el mundo. Recientemente ha publicado en Antiquity dos artículos muy interesantes, uno sobre la reinauguración, la nueva inauguración del Museo del Hombre de París, y otro sobre la perspectiva arqueológica presente y de futuro de algo tan futurista como puede ser el caso del desastre de la central de Fukushima en Japón, en un proyecto en el que va a continuar. Schlanger tiene, o creo que representa, lo mejor de la tradición de la arqueología francesa, que es mucho, pero al mismo tiempo él ha tenido también un conocimiento y un contacto muy estrecho con la arqueología, por ejemplo, británica. De hecho, su tesis doctoral la presentó en la Universidad de Cambridge. En Francia ha estado trabajando en el Instituto Nacional de Historia del Arte, ha trabajado también en el INRAP, en el famoso Instituto de Investigación y de Arqueología Preventiva de Francia, y en la actualidad es catedrático en la École Nationale des Arts, que es actualmente en donde está desarrollando su actividad. Nos va a hablar sobre los museos arqueológicos en Europa, universalismo y nacionalismo en una perspectiva histórica, y haciendo caso al requerimiento que le hemos hecho, le dijimos que quizás será mejor que lo hiciera en inglés que en francés, y amablemente lo va a hacer así.
Thank you very much, Gonzalo. I think I have made a lot of progress in the past 3 days in Spanish, but not enough in order to speak to you in Spanish, I'm afraid. So it will have to be English, which is a sort of a neutral Neo-Latin language that we can all use. So I want, first of all, to express my thanks and my gratitude for the opportunity to be here. Here is both the National Museum of Archaeology, which I discover, and with a lot of amazement and great interest, because this museum is really, we discussed it with Laurent Olivier yesterday, is really one of the best that we've ever seen, both at the European and international level. It is both intelligent, thought-provoking, and welcoming. So this is really a good success. And I'm also very proud and also a bit jealous to be here at the Society for the History of Archaeology in Spain, because I cannot think that we would ever be able to do something comparable in France or in England, to have so many people coming here and being interested in a topic that not long ago used to be left for, retired professors to remember about the good young days, and actually now is growing into a full-fledged discipline or sub-discipline, so it's a great success that you managed to make it popular, and also I think, and this is what I'm going to insist on, you managed to make it relevant. And I think that it is the relevance of the history of archaeology that I would like to promote in the few minutes that I have before you. So, so far as this relevance is concerned, we have to accept, you all know that the history of archaeology matters, and that it can serve as a tool for further reflection, increase in knowledge, and critical thought as well. For my part, as Gonzalo presented to you, I'm not a museum person. Yes, I worked a bit at the, maybe you didn't mention, at the École du Louvre. I was in the research team of the École du Louvre, but My approach to museums is a little bit from the outside. And maybe there are some advantages. There are certainly inconvenience about this, but maybe there are also some advantages of looking at museums from the outside. In order to understand the history of these museums and what sort of challenges they have confronted in the past and how they have dealt with them, how they managed to function, I think is an important lesson for us when we look at the challenges that museums face today. And I will try to be pragmatic in a sense and emphasize that our skills and our interest as historians of archaeology are not just, as they used to say, antiquarian interests, but also interests that can have an impact or add on to the modern world, to address together issues of ethics, issues of politics that are relevant today. So what I'm going to do is to move on to 4 case studies that I present to you that are a combination of the historical and the contemporary. And I will spend different levels of time on these 4 case studies. And with them, I will raise questions concerning nationalism and universalism. And here I borrowed the Spanish question mark. It's a very, very useful device that you can already say at the beginning of the sentence that you are asking a question. Yes, this is. Are the same questions of the local and national universal that were asked in the 19th century, are they relevant to the same questions that we ask today? Okay, this is an important topic. And these two images, these 2 very modern images, are representation of a very modern event, which is the 1867 Exposition Universelle in Paris. Okay, the Exposition Universelle that was created, that was initiated by Napoleon III, Napoleon III, and had as its curator Frédéric Leplay, who was a famous sociologist, and Michel Chevalier, who was a Saint-Simonian, etc. And it is in this context, I will show you in a few minutes, it is in this context that prehistoric archaeology is first displayed. Okay, so it's from here that things move to Saint-Germain-en-Laye, and it is here my argument that the fate or the pertinence, the relevance of this remote past is first fixated. The theme of this conference, of this exhibition, is le travail, yes, trabajo, yes, which is precisely one of the major themes that post-revolutionary France and the world in general in its emerging capitalism is trying to understand. Yes? The diversity of production, the wealth of the nations, and also the past, the history of labor. For this exhibition was built, this building that you can see here that suffered from a lot of criticism, but it is a building specifically made for the exhibition, made by an architect you have not heard about, Jean-Baptiste Krantz, who had an assistant that you have heard about and that you will see in a minute, Gustave Eiffel. And they built this structure. You can see a map of Paris. If you want to come, please, to visit Paris. This is a map from 1867, and the building is here, and it is composed of corridors or circumference, where you can see different products of industry, and a system of streets, or radius, which is the different nations. In the middle, this is a process of construction of this building. In the middle of it, there is a garden. And around the garden, it was decided in 1862, 1863, there will be a museum called Musée rétrospectif or Musée de l'histoire du travail. Okay? And it is in this museum that for the first time, Paleolithic artifacts were shown, precisely with this intention of showing the origins, the beginnings of the process that brought us to this triumph of machinery. Moreover, this project of the Museum of the History of Labor has as its leitmotif a very, very interesting sentence, which is l'histoire universelle du travail national. Okay? Paradox. Yeah? L'histoire universelle du travail national. And the architecture, the construction of this building, both the physical construction and the conceptual, the intellectual construction of it, is in order to embody, to concretize this paradox. This is how it looks like. What you see here, pardon. The central garden, with around it the Musée de l'Histoire du Travail, and around the galleries with the different productions, machineries, food, furniture, etc., and in colors the different nations, the different countries that occupy the space. So the blue, big blue, of course, n'est-ce pas, is France, yes, the host country which takes the biggest part. And then France would show different products of its industry and occupies a place in the center. And the key issue of the link between the universal history of national labor is captured in this sentence, which is in the correspondence between Frédéric Leplay, who I mentioned was the curator, the man in charge of the exhibition, and his colleague, maybe you heard about him, Sir Henry Cole, who was the director of the South Kensington Museum in London. And the correspondence in English makes the link, or tries to make a link between the present contemporary power of the nation and its past. What is the relation between ancient prowess and contemporary industrial force? Is there a relation? And because of this special architecture, there must be a relation, because this relation is going to be physical. How much space do we give to nations in relation or not to their ancient importance, to their contemporary importance? Yes? And the sentence here that you read, that I highlighted, the Imperial Commission cannot, in consideration of the large space intended to be given to this gallery, to bind itself to allot strictly to each state the corresponding portion of the section extending in the central garden. Okay? It's not like a cake that you cut, a pie. There has to be some adjustments in the middle. And these adjustments are related to the present productive powers of a country, may not necessarily correspond to those which it possessed in ancient times. And how does it look like? You can see here, this is Grande-Bretagne. Okay, Grande-Bretagne takes a lot of space at the expense of its colonies, of Brazil. United States has the same space proportionately as the same ancient space, if you want, in the museum as it has in modern times. But if you see here, for example, the États pontificaux, yes, the Vatican is very small in contemporary industry. Yes, they produce maybe ex voto or whatever little things for the tourist. But in the past, they were very big, so they receive a bigger space. Okay, and then of course you will ask about Spain. Yes, and here you are. So Spain is here, and it has the same, proportionately, the same space in the Museum of the History of Labor as it has in contemporary times. Okay? Unlike other countries, which, for example, interesting thing is Switzerland next to Spain. This is just before the fascination with the Palafittic building. So there is not yet space for Switzerland in the museum, in the Central Museum. Okay? So here again you have a visualization of what does it mean that you are in the present and in the past? How do you combine, how do you link the present with the past? So if I conclude on this very important example, what we see here, first of all, is the importance of temporary exhibition. I don't know if you spoke about it in the past few days, the difference between the permanent displays and the temporary displays, and the way that innovations can be brought forward in the temporary construction as distinct from the discourse will be different for the permanent and for the temporary. Second important point is the organization of space and the construction of display. The material organization of the space is both an opportunity and a constraint for conveying a message. A third important point is that the context in which this large exhibition, 11 million people came to see it, is of course the wealth of the contemporary nations in the logic of comparison, which is also a logic of competition. And it is in this context that prehistoric archaeology became important for modernity. Okay? And you have, I didn't bring you a quotation of Napoleon III. I want to promote prehistoric archaeology because this is the beginning of the story that I want to tell you for the West. And the last point for the prehistorians amongst you is, of course, that this is the first time I said that Paleolithic finds are presented. And you will now understand, or you will think differently of a very common expression that you all use, the Acheulean industry, the Mousterian industry. The term industry is the one of the exhibition, okay? That we don't use anymore because nowadays we consider that Neanderthals are pre-industrial by definition. They are people of nature. They are not mass-producing. But the term industry stays precisely from this very, very founding moment. My second example, okay, the new Musée de l'Homme that has been renewed, and you can see from the window, remember I mentioned Gustave Eiffel, so here is Gustave Eiffel on the same place where the exhibition, the Champ de Mars, the 1867 exhibition, is now the place where the Eiffel Tower is seated. The photograph is from the palace, the Palais de Chaillot, which is where the new museum, Musée de l'Homme, is held, and that is the colline de Trocadéro. The Trocadéro is a place where the Universal Exhibition of 1878 was held and retained a number of ethnographic, prehistoric, American finds that stayed in a very dusty museum until the 1930s, when someone, an important scholar called Paul Rivet, had the job of renovating it. And it took, I think, the same amount of time as it took here to renovate the museum, 6 or 7 years, to construct the Musée de l'Homme. Musée de l'Homme with its very important ideological message of humankind as a whole. We are interested in all its parts. This message is, of course, associated with, although it precedes, but it is associated with the political movements of the Front Populaire, of the exhibition of 1937, during which, as you know, the Spanish pavilion held the Guernica of Picasso that I saw yesterday when I wasn't here. The very important moments of modernization, including scholars like Marcel Mauss. And during the Second World War, this is the place where the first movement of resistance against the Germans was created, yes, in June 40, where you have the printing press where they produced the illegal document. This is the birthplace of the resistance. After the Second World War, there's a long period of more or less decline or fossilization of this museum. Its key elements, which is the Musée Laboratoire, it is also a place where knowledge is produced, not just presented. Its key element, this is the archives of humanity. We need to preserve humanity because it is decaying, it is disappearing, and we need to have its records. And then in 2016, or 2015, where the Museo was reopened after, again, 6 years. I think 6 years is the average for renovation of major museums. The new Nouveau Musée de l'Homme was reopened, partly as a response to another major event that took place in the world of museum, which is the Musée du Quai Branly, that you can also see on this photograph behind the trees over there. The Musée du Quai Branly is, as you know, a creation that reflects a political will of the then President Jacques Chirac, who was interested in what is called les arts premiers. Yes, African, Asiatic, extreme Far Orient art that used to be in the Musée de l'Homme, and that has been removed in both physically but also conceptually very difficult process, and put down the other side of the Seine in this new Musée du Quai Branly that I will show you a couple of pictures later on. So now you have this new Musée de l'Homme at a crossroads, because it has lost a large part of its ethnographic collections, and it has to revalorize two things: its own collections, which are now anthropological. Yes, the Musée de l'Homme is a branch of the Museum of Natural History. And the second thing it has to valorize is its history, what I just told you about. So when you visit this museum, you have 10 stations with a lot of historical information, names of important people. You can see a Salle André Leroy-Gourand, there is a Auditorium Rivet, there is a Salle Germaine-Tillon, etc., etc. So the museum is very conscious of its own history, and it puts its own history at key moments in the visit. I said it is very interested in skulls, and you can see on top here, maybe you will recognize, this is the skull of René Descartes, a philosopher. Fairly small skull, but big ideas. And these are the skulls of phrenology, also a very important collection of phrenology, of the localization within the brain of properties. And this display here is a very, very daring and interesting solution to, if you want, a colonial problem of accumulation of castes of indigenous people. And several hundreds of these castes of people who represent, who were taken in the old days from the very end of the 19th century by followers of Paul Broca, anatomist, to have a typical example of a Sudanese or a typical example of an Australian, with a process of casting using plaster. And the solution of this museum was not to hide them, but to display them. To display it together with an explanation of the context in which they were produced. And here they are before you because they are also works of art. Yes, there is an aesthetic dimension, this is undeniably the case, that you can appreciate. And then, when you just go beyond this, these are the busts of specimens, and these are the busts of scientists. Okay? And the museum is not aware that they are actually using the same mode of display, the same physical presence, you know, head and shoulders of individuals. This one is a typical Sudanese, and this one is a great friend of Spanish archaeology, l'Abbé Henri Breuil. Yes? And this one is another friend of Spanish archaeology, Émile Cartaillac, mea culpa. Yes, because he went to visit Altamira down there. And he is a great scientist. He's a historical figure who contributed to science. And then you have Buffon, Cuvier, and unfortunately, I must say, chauvinistically, there's only somewhere one mention of Charles Darwin, and all the others are French. So I'm sure that the way that our knowledge of human sciences have evolved is less parochial than that, but this is the fond de commerce of the museum. I said they are now focused on skulls. Yes, both ancient skulls and modern skulls as well. And clearly, the museum is emphasizing some aspects of its own history in order to emphasizing aspects of its own history in order to leave intact and unquestioned the message it wants to convey, the historical message it wants to convey. And this historical message, you can have it here. I don't know if you, how well you can appreciate this sentence. We are all heirs, descendants, yes, heirs of a genetic heritage and a cultural heritage that is specific to us. Okay. Now, I'm sure that there are maybe physical anthropologists or biologists in the room who would be very happy with the idea that our patrimonio genetico is unique, certo. But to say, to imagine that our cultural heritage is unique to each one of you, has their own different cultural heritage, it's a little bit more problematic, yes? It seems to betray a very superficial understanding of what culture is. Something that we share or that we don't share, that we contest, but something that is necessarily collective, okay, and not individual. And the reason why the museum is doing this is because it is interested in promoting the story of individuals from the beginning of time until nowadays and through the future. It is a museum in praise of individualism, in praise of entrepreneurship. Okay? It is a museum where visitors learn that just like Homo erectus left Africa, you have nice maps with these hand axes. This was the beginning of globalization. And globalization nowadays, you have a map here with all kinds of links and connections. Very well done, very aesthetic, the display. This globalization is inevitable. This is the way things are since the beginning of time. Okay? Individual entrepreneurs move around in the landscape and produce more and more contacts, more and more communication. And this is, of course, the message that, again, could be put into question. Especially, since I will mention this when I finish in a few minutes, this is a message that is of great interest to the sponsors of the museum. The sponsors of the museums are, of course, multinational companies, globalized, who want to, who are happy with a portrayal of humankind as individual socioeconomic actors moving towards greater globalization. My third brief example, also with a Spanish dimension, is the real politics of the labels. I saw also here in the display on history of archaeology, you have, on the history of the museum, you have a question about the labels, yes? What do you write in the labels of the museum? And here it's a recent exhibition, Le Corps en Mouvement at the Musée du Louvre, which was curated by no less than Jean-Luc Martinez, so the director of the museum. And I'm not showing you any of the actual objects, very interesting about dance and how you capture movement in arts that are necessarily static. I direct your attention to the labels and the qualification, the geopolitical qualification that is attached to the name of places. Okay? And here, in this case, you have an artist who was born in Tiraspol, actual Russia. Okay? And he died in Fontenay-aux-Roses. If you don't know, Fontenay-aux-Roses is in actual France. But somehow they forgot to indicate that. And then you have another very interesting example here. Gilles Lambert Godchard, Bruxelles, Belgique actuelle. Now, if you remember that Belgium was created in 1830 just 5 years before the death of the gentleman. So he was certainly not born in Belgium, because Belgium did not exist. And then, of course, Tiepolo, yes, born in Venezia, which is in actual Italy, and he died in Madrid, which is in actual Spain. So, and another example, and we can, when we go to ancient periods, some countries, Greece is eternal, of course, this is what Winkelmann taught us. So Athens is not in actual Greece, is not in Attica, it is in Greece. Whereas places that are in Asia Minor are now in actual Turkey. Okay? Again, Egypt, l'Égypte actuelle, Asyut, whereas an item from Ugarit is both in Phoenicia and in actual Syria. Okay, so I think that you have understood the point here. So unfortunately, this exhibition was not very systematic about what it considers that deserves to be geopolitically requalified. Okay, it's certainly when you talk about Phoenicia in actual Syria and you don't talk about Attica with Athens, you are not, you are mixing genres, you are losing an opportunity to be pedagogical, and you are losing an opportunity to be thought-provoking, to ask the public, what does it mean? Well, the word changes, okay? Shall we take our starting point, Spain and this town of Athens, we call it Athens, l'Athènes actuelle. Shall we take as a starting point the past and show the impermanence or the flexibility of the present? Okay, this is an important opportunity that was not seized. My last example, well, this is a follow-up. Ne pas toucher les œuvres, yes? Because it links that very nicely to our last and a bit more tragic example, is the œuvres that cannot be touched because they are being destroyed. Yes? Of course, I'm referring obviously to the works, the archaeological sites in Iraq and in Syria that have been willfully, deliberately destroyed in these past years and months. And they bring into question the notion of le site éternel, the eternity, the durability of the sites to which we cannot have access. So the Grand Palais, not very far then from the Musée de l'Homme and the Musée du Quai Branly and the Tour Eiffel, had this temporary display of three-dimensional reconstruction, various sophisticated technology for us who cannot be there. Yes, the absence is compensated by the technology. So examples of how this works out. And an example also, of course, of shortcuts and amnesias, where the emphasis, the intention is to highlight the singularity of iconoclasm, of vandalism, whereas we know very well that these are underlying features of all human societies who have been destroying for various reasons, to various degrees, in various amount of visibility, the past, the monuments of predecessors. But in order to highlight this exceptionality, the evil that happens, you forget about history. You forget about history, and you have here examples of dates. So, I don't know how well you can see, inscription of Palmyra at the World Heritage Site UNESCO 1980, and 2015, occupation du site par l'État islamique. Also here, excavation by the Oriental Institute of Chicago, 1927, destruction of the famous winged bull in 2015. Okay? As if nothing happened in between, as if archaeology was not then as it is now, an element, a material element in the construction of identity, in the negotiation, in the socio-economic, political world in which it is present. And here are the winged bulls. The winged bulls that are, you see her little collage, this is when they are destroyed today on site. And this is the historical process of their transport, movement, from over there into here, to the present, to the Musée du Louvre, where the French President François Hollande and the director of the Louvre I mentioned earlier, Jean-Luc Martinez, and the Director General of UNESCO, Madame Bukova, can congratulate themselves on the fact that since 1847, the Louvre shelters, abrite les antiquités orientales. Okay? And by saying that, they are transforming the nature, the role of the museum. The museum is a place which concentrates antiquities from elsewhere with a view of demonstrating the power, the strength, the reach of the nations that concentrate these museums, the Louvre, the British Museum, the museums in Berlin, into a place that has actually, retrospectively, a vocation of safeguard, of maintenance, of keeping these past for humanity. Okay, and this is part of this discourse, the new discourse of the Universal Museum. We are here to show you, to protect for the generations to come. So if I conclude, I should. This is a plea, a call for a better understanding, more complex, more contextualized, more historicized, more critical of what museums, archaeology museum and museums in general as an institution, as a political product, and as an economic asset in the modern world are. In particular, we see the tendency towards the commodification of culture and of cultural heritage, either directly or with the issue of sponsorship, which I think should be a new major theme for historians of archaeology. Also in countries like Spain or like France, which are more statist and where it has been traditionally the state, for better or for worse, who invest resources in the protection and the valorization of heritage. And here I could not keep myself from giving you an example. So this is the Musée de l'Homme with its new sponsors. I mentioned that the sponsors are very happy about this globalization is the future message. And a slightly unfortunate expression in French, rendre accessible à tous l'accès à la culture, yes, which is rendre accessible l'accès, which, well, it's certainly a mistake of the communication people who wrote this, but it shows the circularity and the superficiality of making accessible the access to culture. Right? How sincere is this, and how relevant it is used. And the second example, making accessible, is of course the Musée du Quai Branly, where you have this caricature. I'm very happy that the artist Willem, famous Dutch originally but working in France, Charlie Hebdo, for example, he's one of the illustrators of Charlie Hebdo, gave me permission to use this caricature, which precisely shows some of the dilemma and the problems that modern museums are facing today when they retain objects. They want to show them, they want to make access to them accessible within the context which is geopolitical, economic, immigration, identity, and so forth. So my broad conclusion then is that we should be able to use and explore museums as a means of being relevant in the present world. And my other conclusion at this smaller scale is that we can actually do something about it, because we as historians of archaeology, as members of the society, the Spanish Society for the History of Archaeology, or comparable societies elsewhere, or people who are not organized in society but we have this vocation, we are able, we, I think, can provide, because we look at what happened in 1867, when these museums were created in the context of industrial modernity and the imperial world, we can bring in something extra to show that our knowledge is relevant also for the present. Okay, we are well placed to do this. And I think that this is a major achievement of this society and this conference, to show this relevance. Thank you very much.